Mother and children attacked by a wild buffalo. The lone rancher saved them. And they found family along the way. Get ready for an incredible journey through the vast plains of the American West, where danger lurks around every corner, but so does the possibility of finding family in the most unexpected places. Today's story is about courage, survival, and the beautiful way broken souls can heal each other. If you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. The morning sun blazed mercilessly over the endless expanse of prairie grass, casting long shadows that danced with each gust of wind. Martha Wilson pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders as she guided the rickety wagon across the unforgiving terrain. Beside her sat her two children, 10-year-old Samuel, whose bright blue eyes constantly scanned the horizon with curiosity, and 8-year-old Emma, who clutched her raggedy doll as if it were her lifeline. They had been traveling for 3 weeks now, fleeing the memories of their old life in Missouri after Martha's husband had died in a mining accident. The promise of a new beginning in California seemed both distant and uncertain, but it was all they had left. The wagon creaked and groaned under the weight of their meager possessions, a few clothes, some cooking supplies, and the last of their savings sewn into Martha's petticoat. "Mama, I'm thirsty," Emma whispered, her small voice barely audible. Over the wind, Martha reached for the water canteen, shaking it gently. The liquid sloshed, but she could tell there wasn't much left. "Just a small sip, sweetheart. We need to make it last until we find the next water source." Samuel pointed ahead. "Look, Mama, there's a stream down that way." Martha squinted against the sun's glare and spotted the glimmer of water about a quarter-mile to their left. It would mean deviating from the main trail, but they desperately needed to refill their supplies. She steered the horses toward the stream, unaware that they were being watched. The massive buffalo bull had been separated from his herd during a storm 2 days prior. Confused, angry, and territorial, the animal had been wandering the plains, in an increasingly agitated state. When he caught sight of the approaching wagon, his primitive instincts identified it as a threat to his domain. Martha had just begun to unhitch the horses when she heard a low, rumbling sound that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. She turned slowly, her heart already beginning to race, and saw the enormous creature charging toward them with deadly intent. "Children, get behind the wagon," she screamed. But there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. On the vast open plain, the buffalo was a mountain of muscle and fury, its massive head lowered, sharp horns gleaming in the sunlight. Each thunderous step brought it closer to the helpless family. Samuel grabbed Emma's hand and pulled her toward the wagon's far side, but they all knew it wouldn't provide adequate protection against such a massive beast. Martha searched desperately for anything that could serve as a weapon, but their few possessions offered nothing more threatening than a wooden spoon. The buffalo was now less than 50 yards away, and she could see the wild rage in its dark eyes just when all seemed lost. The sharp crack of a rifle echoed across the plains. The buffalo stumbled but didn't fall, its momentum carrying it forward. Another shot rang out, and this time the beast collapsed just 20 feet from the wagon, its massive body creating a cloud of dust as it hit the ground. Through the settling dust, Martha saw a lone horseman approaching. He was tall and lean, wearing a weathered hat that shadowed his face. His horse moved with the easy grace of an animal well-trained for the harsh realities of frontier life. The stranger's rifle was still in his hands, wisps of smoke curling from its barrel. As he drew closer, Martha could see he was a man in his 30s, with dark hair and penetrating green eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His clothes were practical worn leather chaps, a simple cotton shirt, and boots that had seen countless miles of hard travel. There was something about his bearing that spoke of both competence and solitude. "Are you folks all right?" he asked, dismounting with fluid motion. His voice was deep and steady, carrying the quiet authority of someone accustomed to handling dangerous situations. Martha nodded shakily, still processing how quickly their near-death experience had been resolved. "Yes, thanks to you. I don't know how to thank you properly." "No thanks necessary, ma'am. Just doing what needed doing." He approached the fallen buffalo, confirming it was dead before turning back to the family. "Name's Jake Morrison. I've got a ranch about 5 miles north of here. I'm Martha Wilson, and these are my children, Samuel and Emma." She gestured to the children, who were peeking out from behind the wagon with a mixture of fear and fascination. Jake touched the brim of his hat politely. "Pleasure to meet you, despite the circumstances. You folks traveling far?" "California," Martha replied. "We single quotes read ... starting over." Something in her voice, a quality he recognized from his own painful experiences, made Jake studied her more carefully. He saw the wariness in her eyes, the way she held herself with determined strength, despite obvious hardship. That's a long journey to make alone, especially with young ones, he observed. These plains can be unpredictable. As if to emphasize his point, dark clouds were beginning to gather on the horizon, promising one of the sudden, violent storms that could appear without warning in this country. If you're enjoying the story so far, a quick like really helps support the channel. The first fat raindrops began to fall, just as Jake finished helping Martha secure their belongings back in the wagon. The buffalo carcass lay nearby, a stark reminder of how quickly life could change on the frontier. "Storm's coming in fast," Jake said, glancing at the rapidly darkening sky. "My ranch isn't far. You're welcome to wait it out there." Martha hesitated. She had learned to be cautious about accepting help from strangers, but her children's safety had to come first. The approaching storm looked severe, and their wagon would provide little protection against the kind of weather that could kill. "That's very kind of you, Mr. Morrison. We accept." Jake nodded and mounted his horse. "Follow me. Keep the wagon moving. Steady, the ground gets treacherous when it's wet." As they traveled, the storm unleashed its full fury. Rain fell in sheets, and lightning split the sky with brilliant white fire. Samuel and Emma huddled close to their mother under a canvas top, while Martha fought to keep the horses calm and the wagon on course. Through it all, Jake remained visible ahead of them, a steady presence guiding them through the chaos. When they finally reached the ranch, Martha was surprised by what she saw. The main house was modest but well built, constructed of sturdy logs with a stone foundation. A barn and several outbuildings completed the homestead, all showing signs of careful maintenance despite their obvious age. It was the home of a man who took pride in his work, even if he worked alone. Jake helped them move their belongings into the house, refusing Martha's attempts to protest that they could sleep in the barn. "Barn's no place for a lady and children," he said simply. "I've got plenty of room." The interior of the house told a story of solitude. The furniture was practical and sparse: a table, a few chairs, a simple bed in the corner, but everything was clean and organized, speaking to the disciplined life of a man who had learned to depend entirely on himself. As Martha looked around, she noticed something that made her heart ache with recognition. On the mantelpiece sat a small tintype photograph of a woman and child, both bearing a resemblance to Jake. The woman had kind eyes and a gentle smile, while the child, a boy of perhaps 6, grinned with innocent joy. Jake caught her looking and cleared his throat. "That's my wife Sarah and my son Tommy. They died of fever 3 years ago." The simple words carried a weight of grief that Martha understood all too well. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "I lost my husband 6 months ago in a mining accident." For a moment, the only sound was the rain hammering against the windows and the wind howling around the eaves. Two people who had learned the crushing weight of loss recognized something in each other, shared understanding that needed no words. "I'll get a fire going," Jake said, breaking the silence. "You folks must be cold and hungry." As the fire crackled to life, the warmth began to transform the atmosphere. Samuel and Emma emerged from their shy silence, gradually becoming curious about their surroundings. Emma discovered a small wooden horse on a shelf, clearly a child's toy, and looked questioningly at Jake. "That belonged to my son," he said gently. "You can play with it if you'd like." Emma's face lit up, and she carefully took the toy, treating it with the reverence of someone who understood its significance. Samuel, meanwhile, was drawn to the rifle Jake had used to save them, though he kept a respectful distance. "Have you ever shot a gun, son?" Jake asked. Samuel shook his head. "Papa always said I was too young." "Well, learning to handle a firearm properly is important out here. Maybe tomorrow I can show you some basics with your mother's permission, of course." Martha felt a flutter of concern mixed with gratitude. She knew Samuel needed male guidance, but trusting someone new felt dangerous. Still, there was something about Jake Morrison that suggested genuine care, rather than ulterior motives. As evening fell, Martha prepared a simple meal from their traveling supplies, insisting on contributing despite Jake's protests. The smell of bacon and beans filled the cabin, creating an atmosphere of domestic comfort that none of them had experienced in a long time. During dinner, conversation flowed more easily. Jake told them about ranch life, the challenges of raising cattle, the beauty of the changing seasons, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands. In return, Martha shared stories about their life in Missouri, carefully avoiding the painful details of her husband's death and their subsequent struggles. Samuel was fascinated by everything about ranch life. "Do you have horses?" Besides the one you were riding. 3 of them, Jake replied. Plus about 40 head of cattle. It's not a big operation, but it's enough for one man. Do you ever get lonely? Emma asked with the innocent directness of childhood. The question hung in the air for a moment. Jake looked at the little girl so much like his own son in her fearless curiosity and gave an honest answer. Yes, I do. But you learn to live with it. As the storm continued to rage outside, the 4 of them sat by the fire, each lost in their own thoughts. Martha watched Jake interact with her children and saw something she hadn't expected: a man who was still capable of gentleness despite his loss, still able to find joy in simple human connection. For his part, Jake was surprised by how natural it felt to have people in his home again. The house had been so quiet for so long that he had almost forgotten what it sounded like when filled with voices and laughter. When it came time to sleep, Jake gave up his bed to Martha and the children. Despite her protests, he settled himself on a blanket by the fire, but sleep didn't come easily. For the first time in 3 years, his house felt like a home. The storm cleared by morning, leaving the world washed clean and sparkling under a brilliant blue sky. Martha woke to the sound of voices outside and realized that Samuel was already up, eagerly helping Jake with the morning chores. Through the window, she watched her son learn to milk a cow under Jake's patient instruction. Hold the bucket steady, Jake was saying. That's it. She can sense if you're nervous, so just stay calm and confident. Emma was awake now too, rubbing her eyes and looking around the unfamiliar room. Where are we, Mama? We're safe, sweetheart. Mr. Morrison let us stay here during the storm. Martha quickly dressed and stepped outside to find Jake teaching Samuel how to properly gather eggs from the chickens. Her son's face glowed with concentration and pride as he carefully placed each egg in the basket. Good morning, Jake called out, touching his hat brim in greeting. Hope you slept well. Better than we have in weeks, Martha admitted. Thank you again for your hospitality. No need to keep thanking me. Breakfast will be ready shortly. Samuel here has been a real help with the chores. The pride in her son's voice when he announced, I milked Bessie all by myself, made Martha's heart swell. It had been too long since she'd seen him look so confident and happy. After breakfast, Jake made good on his promise to teach Samuel about firearms safety. Using an unloaded rifle, he demonstrated proper handling techniques while Martha watched nervously. First rule, Jake explained seriously, is that you never point a gun at anything you don't intend to shoot. Second rule is that you always assume a gun is loaded, even when you know it isn't. These rules keep people alive. Samuel listened with the intense focus that children reserve for truly important lessons. Jake's teaching style was patient but firm, emphasizing safety and responsibility over excitement or bravado. While the shooting lesson continued in a safe area away from the buildings, Emma helped Martha wash the breakfast dishes. Through the window, they could see the vast expanse of prairie that surrounded the ranch. It's so big, Mama, Emma said quietly. Are we going to keep traveling forever? The question struck Martha unexpectedly. She had been so focused on surviving each day that she hadn't really considered what their ultimate destination would look like, or whether they'd recognize it when they found it. I don't know, sweetheart. We'll keep going until we find the right place to call home. How will we know when it's the right place? Martha paused in her dishwashing, considering the question seriously. I think we'll just know when we feel safe and welcome, when it feels like where we belong. If you're enjoying this story, leave a comment below about what you think will happen next. That afternoon, Jake surprised them by suggesting a ride around the property. He had gentle horses that could carry Martha and the children safely, and he wanted to show them the full scope of his land. The ranch was larger than Martha had initially realized, encompassing several thousand acres of grazing land, wooded areas, and a beautiful creek that wound through the valley. Jake pointed out landmarks, shared stories about building the various structures, and demonstrated a deep knowledge of the land that spoke of years of careful observation. This is where I plan to expand the herd next year, he said, indicating a pasture area near the creek. Good grass, easy access to water. Should support maybe 20 more head. You're planning to grow the operation? Martha asked. Jake nodded, though something in his expression suggested uncertainty. Been thinking about it. Question is whether it makes sense for ... Double quotes. He paused, seeming to reconsider his words. Whether it makes sense in general. Martha sensed there was more to his hesitation than he was saying, but she didn't push. She was beginning to understand that Jake was a man who chose his words carefully and kept his deeper thoughts to himself. As they rode, Samuel peppered Jake with questions about everything from cattle breeding to weather patterns. Emma, meanwhile, seemed enchanted by the wildflowers that dotted the meadows and the butterflies that danced among them. "Look, Mama," she called out, pointing to a particularly beautiful patch of purple flowers. "They're like the ones in Papa's garden." The reference to her father came so naturally that it caught Martha off guard. For months, the children had rarely mentioned their father, as if speaking of him might make their loss more real. But here, in this peaceful setting, Emma seemed able to remember him with joy, rather than only sadness. That evening, as they sat around the fire again, Jake pulled out a well-worn book. "I used to read to Tommy every night," he said quietly. "Would you like me to read to you?" The children's enthusiastic response seemed to surprise him, as if he had expected them to refuse. He opened the book to reveal illustrations of adventures in far-off lands, and began to read in a voice that was warm and expressive. As his voice filled the cabin with tales of brave heroes and magical adventures, Martha found herself studying the man who had so unexpectedly entered their lives. Jake Morrison was clearly someone who had built walls around himself after his loss, but those walls were showing cracks. The children seemed to instinctively sense his fundamental goodness, while Martha recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood the weight of responsibility and the pain of starting over. When the story ended and the children were tucked into bed, Martha and Jake sat by the dying fire, each lost in thought. "They're good children," Jake said finally. "You've raised them well." "I worry I'm not enough," Martha admitted. "Samuel needs what a father could give him. And Emma, she's so young to have lost so much. Children are stronger than we think, and you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." Jake poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. "Takes courage to leave everything behind and start over. Sometimes I wonder if I'm making a terrible mistake, taking them away from everything familiar, heading towards something completely unknown. What's the alternative? Staying somewhere that held only painful memories?" His question hung in the air between them, and Martha realized that Jake understood her situation better than anyone else could. He had faced the same choice after his last day, and be haunted by what was gone, or find the courage to build something new. "I suppose you're right," she said softly. "But it's frightening, not knowing what comes next." "Maybe," Jake said, his voice thoughtful. "What comes next doesn't have to be as scary as what we're leaving behind." The next 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Martha found herself falling into the patterns of ranch life, helping with meals, tending the small garden behind the house, mending clothes that had been neglected too long. Samuel threw himself into learning everything Jake could teach him about ranching, from repairing fences to reading weather signs. Emma discovered a litter of barn kittens and appointed herself their guardian, spending hours in the hayloft playing with the tiny creatures. It was on the 4th morning that Martha realized she had stopped thinking about California. She was hanging laundry on the line Jake had rigged up behind the house when the thought struck her. For the first time since her husband's death, she wasn't focused on escaping the present moment. Instead, she was simply ... living in it. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. Jake found her there, standing motionless with a shirt half pinned to the line, staring out at the horizon with an expression he couldn't quite read. "Everything all right?" he asked quietly. Martha turned to look at him, this man who had saved their lives and then, without seeming to try, had begun to save something deeper, their ability to hope. "Jake," she said carefully, "what would you think about that is, would you consider..." She stopped, frustrated by her inability to find the right words. "Take your time," he said gently. "Would you consider taking on some help around the ranch? I mean, in exchange for room and board." The words came out in a rush, as if she were afraid her courage would fail if she spoke too slowly. Jake was quiet for a long moment, and Martha felt her heart sink. She had misread the situation, assumed an intimacy that didn't exist, presumed too much. "I've been thinking the same thing," he said finally. "Been thinking it for days, actually, just wasn't sure how to ask." The relief that flooded through Martha was so intense it made her dizzy. "Really? This place? It's been quiet too long, empty too long." He gestured toward the house, the barn, the vast expanse of land that stretched in all directions. "It was built for a family, built to be shared. The children and I, we don't have much to offer except hard work and gratitude." Jake shook his head. "You have more to offer than you know. Samuel's got natural instincts for this kind of life, and Emma, she reminds me what it feels like to see wonder in ordinary things. And you..." He paused, seeming to struggle with the words. You remind me that healing is possible. That afternoon, they called the children together for a family meet. Martha realized that was exactly what they had become. A family. Not the family any of them had started with. Not the family they had planned, but a family nonetheless. How would you feel about staying here? Martha asked. Making this our home. Samuel's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Really, we could stay forever. I could learn to be a real rancher. Emma's response was more thoughtful. Would Mr. Jake be like? Would he be our papa now? The question created a moment of profound silence. Jake knelt down so he was at Emma's eye level, his expression serious and gentle. I could never replace your papa, he said carefully. But if you'd like, I could be something like a papa, someone who cares about you and protects you and helps you learn and grow. Emma considered this, with the gravity that children bring to truly important decisions. Finally, she nodded. I think Papa would like that. He always said family isn't just about blood, it's about people who choose to love each other. Over the following weeks, they worked together to make the arrangement official and permanent. Jake helped Martha write letters to settle her affairs back in Missouri, while she helped him plan the expansion of the ranch that would now support 4 people instead of 1. The changes to the house were small but significant. Emma's drawings appeared on the walls. Samuel's collection of interesting rocks found homes on windowsills. Martha's sewing basket took up residence by the fire. Jake's lonely photograph on the mantle was joined by new images of their growing family, captured by a traveling photographer who passed through the area. The first winter was challenging but wonderful. They learned each other's rhythms, discovered how to share space and responsibilities, figured out how to be a family. There were difficult moments, times when grief would unexpectedly surface, when the children missed their father, when Martha wondered if she was being fair to any of them, but there were far more moments of joy. Samuel's pride when he successfully delivered his first calf. Emma's delight when her kitten had kittens of its own. Martha's quiet satisfaction in making curtains for windows that had been bare too long. Jake's amazement at how full his house could feel, how laughter could echo in corners that had been silent for years. Spring brought new challenges and new celebrations. The expanded herd thrived under their combined care. Samuel proved himself capable of handling increasingly complex responsibilities. Emma started a small vegetable garden that produced enough food to last through the following winter. Martha's careful management of the household finances allowed them to purchase improvements that made everyone's life easier. But perhaps the most significant change was in Jake himself. The solitary man who had saved them from the buffalo had transformed into someone who smiled easily, who told stories at dinner, who could be found in the evenings teaching Samuel to whittle or braiding Emma's hair with surprising skill. One evening in late spring, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Emma asked the question that had been on all their minds. Are we going to stay together forever? Jake and Martha exchanged a look over the children's heads, a look that held months of growing trust, affection, and something deeper that neither had dared to name until now. Forever sounds about right, Jake said quietly, and as the stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, the people who had found each other in the aftermath of loss sat together, no longer alone, no longer just surviving, but truly living. They had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful families are the ones that choose each other, and that home isn't a place you're born to, it's a place you're brave enough to build. What an incredible journey from tragedy to hope, from strangers to family. This story shows us that sometimes life's most devastating moments can lead to its most beautiful blessings. The Wilson family found more than just shelter from a storm, found a place to belong, and Jake discovered that opening his heart again was the key to truly honoring the family he had lost. If you enjoyed this story, leave a comment below. I'd love to know which part touched you the most. Was it Jake's brave rescue, the children's resilience, or maybe that moment when they all realized they had become a real family? What did you think about how they built trust with each other? Share your thoughts in the comments, and let's discuss how this tale reflects the real pioneering spirit of the American West. If you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss our next adventure through history. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the Old West, and I'll see you in the next story.